Hello everyone, happy Halloween. Today I'm gonna read some of my favorite no sleep slash creepypasta slash scary stories to you. And a lot of these actually are kind of new to me because I read them when I was like years ago, like when I was super young. So they're still new to me too, but I just remember these being some of my favorites when I read them for the first time. I grew up on creepypastas and then later on no sleep when I discovered Reddit, but yeah, and I love scary stories. I also just grew up on scary stories in general. I feel like culturally that was a big thing with my family, at least. It's just like sharing scary stories and things like that. If you guys have any scary stories that were kind of like passed down with your family, let me know because I love listening to them. But the first one that I'm gonna read, I have my little iPad here. Give me 1 second here. Oh yeah, here. Okay, so this first one is Anansi's Goatman story. A lot of these are really popular, so you might have already heard them, but I don't know, maybe it'll be a nice refresher. Here's my story. Be 16, be black and have family down in Alabama. They farm and own a huge amount of land down in Huntsville. Uncle owns a big house and a bunch of trailers they put out in the woods for hunting or camping. Down south, cousins suggest that we go out there to camp. They know I'm a city kid from Chicago, so they tease the fuck out of me. Collect food, kill a pig and some chickens, and bring necessities to camp out for a few days. We get to the camp and it's obvious something is weird. The air has this weird electric smell like right before a storm, like ozone. We think nothing of it and unpack and go down to a little creek to swim for a few hours. All of a sudden, some older white guy and a white teenager come out of the bushes. He has a shotgun in the crook of his arm and says hello and asks us what we're doing this far back in the woods. Tell him about my uncle, who he knows, and say we're camping out. He tells us we need to be real careful out here and stick together because there is a big animal in the woods. His son, who is my age, asks if he can stay and hang out with us. He says okay. I'm going to stop green texting because the story is fairly long and the format is harder to write in. So we end up playing football. Sticking around with me, there's the white kid Tanner, 5 of my cousins, and then 4 of their friends. In total, there were 5 girls and 6 boys. We all were around 15 to 17, and we ended up just sticking the day away. Eventually, we head back to the camp and pull out some stuff for a campfire, even though the trailers both had kitchenettes. Tanner says that his family's property sits up against my uncle's. He wants to run home and ask his dad if he can come out camping with us. My cousin Rooster says he's going to go with him since it's going to be dark soon. One of the girls also wants to tag along. It's about 7 o'clock and it's starting to get pretty dark. They grab flashlights and take the trail toward Tan's property. The rest of us chill. We make s'mores, drink, and kiss on the girls. About 30 or 40 minutes later, there's the smell of ozone again. You can notice it over the scent of the fire we had started. This really nasty, coppery smell, like right after you've had a nosebleed and it's stopped. It wasn't exactly like dried blood, but it was that metallic back of your throat smell. We immediately think that it's some kind of electrical malfunction or that someone left a hot plate on or some shit. We search the trailers and nothing's on, but we can all smell it. All of a sudden, we can hear people booking it down the path toward us. Rooster, Tan, and the girl all come running into the clearing, out of breath. And they don't even break stride, they all run into the trailer right by where the fire is. We all get the fuck out of there and into the trailers. They end up calming down, even Rooster's crying his fucking eyes out at this point. All the while, the fire is guttering lower and lower, so my other cousins say fuck it and are about to go outside to get the generator out of a shed between the trailers. Tanner goes, fuck no, lock the front door, ain't nobody else going outside. He'd been crying too. His eyes are bloodshot and puffy, and his pants are dirty as shit. He goes on to tell us that they went up to his house. His father said sure, he could go out camping, but to make sure that they were careful on the way back and that maybe they should take one of the hunting rifles just in case. Evidently, Tanner had seen something in their yard a few days before. One of their pigs had been ripped up and half eaten. They assumed it was just some big cats or coyotes, even though they don't usually fuck with live animals. Tanner went upstairs, packed his stuff, and told his dad they would be okay without the rifle because coyotes avoid people. Then they started walking back toward where we were camping. Rooster finally stops crying and shaking. The girl already had, but was now just staring out the window with a dumb look on her face. He says they had gotten halfway into the woods towards the camp when they started to hear shit in the forest. It was almost pitch black by this time, so they weren't sure at first what the fuck it was. The girl says that she heard something in the bushes right off the trail. They all beamed their flashlights over there, and there was someone standing in the woods in a little hollow. Rooster said that they shouted at him and told him he was scaring the fuck out of them and what a dick he was. He says that's when he realized that the guy was facing away from them. They kept walking, and they started smelling the nasty, coppery ozone smell. They said that they look off into the forest on the opposite side, and there's a dude standing there too, backward, slightly closer to the path. So now they start power walking, and Tan keeps going, I should have taken the fucking rifle. As they're telling the story, the smell is still super strong, even inside the cabin. They say that after they started walking faster, a kind of low gibbering had began coming from both sides of the wood. As they booked it back to the trailer, the girl said that she flashed her light out to the side of them and saw something jerking itself through the woods. The gibbering just got louder and louder, and when they could see the light from our campfire, something had come out of the woods about 40 yards behind them onto the track. Then they just flat out ran as hard as they could to the trailer. So we're out in the fucking woods, and we're assuming at this point it's some rednecks or some shit trying to fuck with us. All of a sudden, my other cousin, Junior, starts going on about how he went to school with a native kid that was telling him about the goat man or some shit. We probably tell him to shut the fuck up because we don't need any spooky talk right now. But he just keeps going on and on about how it's the fucking goat man and how we're in his woods and blah blah blah. Now at the time, I had never heard of this goat man or any of that, but then a couple years ago, the year before I graduated from college, I had met him for a roommate, and I ended up asking him about it. And to sum it up, it's basically a fucking man with the head of a goat, and he can shapeshift and get among groups of people to terrorize them. It's also supposed to be kind of like the Wendigo. It's bad mojo to even talk about, and even worse if you see it. Keep in mind, I didn't know this back when I was 16. So my cousin is going, the goat man's going to get in and fucking get us. The girls are all terrified, and my cousins and I are all fucking trying to figure out if it's just some hillbillies or an animal. All of a sudden, the smell just goes away. To this day, I haven't even experienced anything like it. Obviously, smells usually fade away or lessen, but it was literally just there 1 second and not the next. So, it's after an hour, making it around 9 or 10. We've stopped shitting bricks enough to go back outside and stoke the fire again. We figure it was just some assholes trying to fuck with us, so we don't go back home because we think if we do, they'll chase us through the woods or some crazy shit. Nothing else weird happens that night. We stay another night, and for the main part of that night, nothing happens. But at about 1 in the morning, we're outside getting drunk and telling ghost stories. And someone is finishing some too spooky story, I don't remember what about. The smell comes back. It's so fucking strong that one of the girls literally starts vomiting. I stand up, and you can actually feel how clammy the air is. I say we should get inside and that this isn't right, that we should have just fucking left. We all go back inside, and we're standing around. My cousin keeps going on about how it's the goat man. My other cousin Rooster tries to shut him the fuck up, and all the time I'm just feeling that something is wrong and I can't figure out what the fuck it is. We end up sitting there for a while. The smell is just as strong and we're terrified and all huddled in this camper. We end up cooking brats for everyone because no one wants to go outside. It's one of those packs with 4 brats. We have a total of 3 packs. I grill them up on the stove and give everyone a hot dog, then get mine. After a while, one of my cousins gets up and goes over to the pot to get another one. He starts grumbling about how I got 2 brats and everyone else only got 1, and I look at him like he's fucking stupid. I tell him that everybody only got 1 because there were only 12 brats, and that if he wanted more, he should open up a new pack and cook some more. That's when the girl that had been out with Rooster and Tan just starts screaming, "Oh Jesus, oh Lord, get it out!" She's crying and shivering, and then it dawns on the cousin standing up what the fuck is wrong. Me and him both glance around the room and I feel my heart fucking sink. I run the fuck out of the cabin and the girl runs out with us. The trailer door is banging against the side of the trailer as everyone books it out. One of my cousin's friends asked me what the fuck was wrong. I start counting us. There's only 11 now. I shit you not, my cousin verified. There had been 12 people in the cabin. But being that everybody didn't really know each other well, nobody had noticed the whole fucking time that there was an extra person. And then I realized earlier that I had kind of noticed that something was off. You know how when you're just dicking around having a good time, you don't sweat the small shit and you don't always keep track of certain stuff? I'm dead sure that someone else had been in the trailer with us and that they had been there for at least a fucking day eating with us. What makes this worse is that I couldn't figure out who it was because I don't think anyone ever actually interacted with the other person / the goat man. The girl kept praying to Jesus and we're all sitting outside. Eventually, we get big ass sticks and go back into the cabin, but there's nobody in there. We count again and there's 11 people. We go back into the trailer and lock the door. We explain what the fuck happened. The girl says that she realized too, and that when she was about to say something, the person sitting next to her had grabbed her leg hard, leaned over toward her, and said something that she couldn't understand. So we are pretty much scared as fuck as we huddle together and I fall asleep. When I wake up, the sun is just coming up and half the people are asleep and the other half are packing her shit up. We all want to walk back home, but like 4 people want to stay until the sun is all the way up. And some people think that we're just fucking around and still want to stay at the trailers. I just want to get the fuck out of the woods. The girl's name was Kira, the one that the goat man had touched. Anyway, I asked her if she really thinks it was something bad, and she says that she just wants to go home and that she doesn't want to ever be out in the woods alone for another night. So we decided to split up. The 4 of us that want to go can go, but I have to stay because I have the keys to the cabin and it's my uncle's and I have to lock up. I'm super pissed at this point because I feel like people aren't taking the shit seriously and I definitely didn't want to be out in the woods for another night. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince the rest of the people, now 4 girls and 4 guys, to get the fuck out of Dodge. Tanner leaves with them to go get a rifle and says he's gonna be back, so there's just seven of us left by 4 p.m. At around 5 p.m., he hasn't made it back yet, and we're getting extremely fucking antsy. The only reason I stopped begging them to leave was because he went to go get a gun. At about 5:30 p.m. or so, the one cousin that did stay says that the girl Kira is outside. We all look outside, and sure enough, she's standing by the fire pit with her back to the cabin. I'm thinking to myself, if she was so fucking scared, why the hell would she come back? And then I get this nasty feeling in my gut. Keep in mind, the whole time, the coppery smell has been gone. Now I realize I can smell just a twinge of it. I say this to the rest of them. Everybody, and these are the people that wanted to stay in the fucking woods after we had the goddamn goat man in our midst, is laughing at me and asking if I set this up to scare them. I'm looking at them like, I'm not fucking bullshitting you at all right now. I asked them why the fuck would I play like that. So one of the girls goes outside to get Kira. She gets halfway to her and stops cold. Kira starts heaving. I don't know how the fuck to describe it. Sort of if like someone with their back turned was laughing without actually making a sound. It was this fact that made me realize there was not a fucking sound in the whole woods. It was dead silent. This was like late September, so it was still fairly hot at the time, but super chilly some days too, and you could usually hear some big-ass geese honking or some kind of birds or squirrels chit-chatting. I step out the door and tell the girl to come back in the fucking trailer right goddamn now. She backs up into it and we lock the fucking door. We pull down all the shades except one and put a guy there in a chair to watch Kira. She stands there for another 20 minutes or so. Eventually, the guy turns to say that she's still there and there's a huge fucking bang on the door. We all jump the fuck up and scramble around the living room of the trailer. The banging is super fucking loud. My cousin is holding one of the girls, the other two are kind of giggling with nervous laughter, and me and the other two guys are shitting bricks. Then, we hear Tan. He's screaming, "Let me the fuck in, stop fucking playing!" We go over to the door and open it, and he stumbles in with a rifle. There's nobody else outside. Evidently, he had walked up to the campsite. Nothing weird happened in the forest, but he had seen a girl. Mind you, he said it was not Kira standing there. When he had gotten to the edge of the clearing, she had turned toward him with a slack-jawed look and just stared him down, slowly tracking him as he walked around the outside of the clearing towards the camp. He said it wasn't until he was almost halfway to the trailer that he realized she was getting closer to him. She had started off by the fire, and without him even seeing her move, she had been turning, inching closer. He said he just ran the rest of the way back to the cabin, thinking it would open. When he got to the door and it was locked, he turned and it was about half the distance to the door. He looks around the room, then gets super pale. He pulls me to the side and whispers in my ear, "You know, there are only 7 of us in here, right?" I get that feeling where your stomach drops to your nuts. It happened back inside the trailer while we were sorting out who was going where, and then when we all went outside to talk earlier in the day, it just slipped right back in. We look out the window and nobody's there. So we recount, and then I go over and ask how many people were here earlier. And everybody says 8. And I say, "Well, how many are here now?" They do the count, and then I realize there are only 7 people in the cabin. Tan had brought back a couple boxes of ammo and his rifle. He had told his dad that there was some kind of animal in the forest because he didn't think he would believe him if he said it was the goat man. He says that his cousin is supposed to be coming down in a few hours and that in the morning we can all go back to his place and his cousin will drive us home. Now I'm really fucking terrified, but I at least feel better because we can be American and shoot the fuck out of whatever it is if it comes back. But then my cousin gets into this huge argument with one of the girls because she thinks I'm trying to be funny and prank them. She's getting really scared and thinks I'm not funny. He keeps telling her I'm not that kind of person, and she says, "Well, how do we know the girl wasn't just Tanner in a wig? Or if it's really the goat man, how do we know that this is the real Tanner and that the goat man didn't just kill Tanner in the woods and take his gun?" So we get into a huge fucking argument about this where me and Tanner are like, we could seriously be in danger because at the very least, someone has been sneaking themselves into our fucking trailer without us knowing and mingling with us, and at the worst, something bad is in the forest fucking with us. One of the girls is crying and saying that she wants to go right now, and we're trying to tell her we shouldn't because none of us are walking through the woods in the middle of the night. At this point, the sun is starting to go down and it's getting a little cloudy out. We eat something and turn on the radio for a while, but we can't really get a station out there with anything decent. So we turn it off about the time that Tan's cousin shows up. He was like 19, I think. Now the sun is just barely over the horizon, and he has one of those heavy-duty lantern flashlights and another rifle. He walks up to the trailer and we whisper to Tan, asking if he's sure that's his cousin. He says yes. The guy looks behind him and all around the camp, then walks in. He kind of glances at all of us and looks a little confused. Then he says, "Where's your other little buddy at? I figured she would meet me up at the cabin. Is she a little slow or something?" She also asked whether we had been cooking blood in the cabin because it smelled like blood and hot pans all the way up the trail. We all are like, fucking nope. We ask him what the fuck he's talking about with the girl he saw. He had come down the same trail Tian had been using and found one of your guys' buddies standing in the middle of the trail looking at him slack-jawed. He had asked her a bunch of questions, but all she did was just look at him. Then she smiled and he said he kept walking. She couldn't seem to keep up with him and kept lagging a little behind. He said he asked her if she was hurt or something and if she needed any help, but she had continued to stare. Eventually, he turned around a bend in the trail, but when he went back to see if she was okay, the trail was empty. He had assumed she had taken some shortcut through the woods to our trailer. We tell him the whole story of what's been going on. I half expected him to say we were full of shit, but he just listened and then sat down on the couches in the living room. Tanner's cousin gets back to the girl. He says that when she had kept trying to lag behind him, it had kind of weirded him the fuck out, so he tried to keep her in front of him. But no matter how slow he walked, she was always lagging a little behind. He smelled this nasty smell and it got stronger as he got to the camp. Eventually, it got really strong. She had said something really low that he didn't catch, and when he had turned around, she had been right the fuck up on him. He stepped back from her. It was at this point that he asked her if she was okay. If she wasn't, he offered to carry her back the rest of the way. She just kept staring. He said he reached out for her, as in to grab her on the shoulder, but he must have misjudged the distance because she was off to the side of where he had put his hand, like she had moved while he was looking dead at her. So at this point, we know the shit's real, unless Tan is playing a joke, which we can tell he's not because he's almost pissing his pants. They load up their rifles, we eat some more, and we just kind of sit around until about 11. To this fucking day, every time I think about this, I really pray to God that it's some huge prank that my cousins played on me and just never revealed, so I would shit myself for the rest of my life. At around 11, the stink of copper turned into an actual gross, blood-like smell, like cooked blood and singed hair. Tian and his cousin Reese get the fuck up instantly and grab the rifles. There's a half knocking, half clawing at the door, and I shit you not, there's this voice. It sounds like when you see those YouTube cats and dogs whose owners teach them how to talk. It says in this halting, weirdly toned voice, "Let me the fuck in, stop fucking playing." It made my fucking nuts creep up against my body, and one of the girls just starts crying and calling for Jesus. It was so fucking obviously not a person talking. It didn't have the right cadence. That's some shit I never realized until that moment, but all people have a certain cadence when they talk, no matter what language. All people have a certain kind of rhythm when talking. This shit didn't have any kind of cadence or rhythm. One of those YouTube cats, that's what the fuck it sounded like outside the door. It sounded like this, almost, just not funny. Sorry for being on a tangent, but if you can't imagine how this shit sounded, then you can't imagine how fucked up the whole situation was. So now I'm in full-on terror mode. We keep yelling outside, "Who is it? Stop fucking around, man," and it just keeps saying, "In," or "Let me the fuck in," for almost 15 minutes. Then the smell goes away for a while, and for the next hour or so you can hear someone basically keep creeping around in the woods and shit. Every couple minutes it comes back to the door and says something. Finally, the smell fades away at around 2 in the morning. Reese says, "Man, fuck this," and opens the door and walks outside with his rifle. He fires a shot into the air and says something to the effect of, "In the name of Jesus Christ, go away." He fires 2 more times, and then from the woods, right up against the river, across from the trailer, it sounds like something is slowly gibbering and hooting. Then it starts screaming, and it almost sounds like a woman and a cat in a bag screaming together. Like, I seriously have never heard any shit like that. We can hear the bush over that way start to shake. Reese fires over into the tree line and then starts backing up into the building. We lock the door and we can hear the shit keening and screaming. Reese says something had come out of the bushes super low to the ground and was crawling toward the cabin. He had shot at it. Pretty much that was how the rest of the night went. Literally constant screaming for the next 2 hours and shit moving out into the tree line. But it never came back up to the cabin until everyone had fallen asleep. Tan had been sitting in the chair watching the door with his rifle. Nobody else heard or saw this, and he told me 2 days later, after the whole thing was over. He said he had been nodding off after the screaming and noises finally stopped. He'd been almost asleep when he saw someone come out of the bathroom and then lay down in the middle of the floor and go to sleep. He just assumed it was one of us and that the guy had nodded off. Then he said he kind of realized something was wrong, and while pretending to be asleep, he counted us. There were 9 people in the cabin. He didn't want to try to shoot at the fucking thing and have it kill us all then and there, or have Reese wake up and start shooting and us kill ourselves, so he just stayed awake all night pretending to be asleep. He said sometimes it would stand up and kind of do this weird jittery thing, or heave like it was laughing, but then it would lay back down. The story closes pretty weak because from my perspective nothing happened. When we woke up, I noticed that Tan was a little jittery and that he was avoiding looking at all of us. But we ate some breakfast, packed up, and started walking to his house. He stayed last in the cabin and said he'd lock up and bring me my uncle's keys. He told us to just start walking and that he'd catch up, which I really didn't want to fucking do. We got a little bit up the path, and when he came running up, we just jogged back to his house. His cousin took us home. There was a window in the bathroom. Tan had gone back to lock up and looked in there. We were too stupid to lock a screenless window, and it was fucking up when he went in there. I'm guessing it had been doing that all along, waiting for us to fall asleep or slip up and then getting in among us. It walked with us all the goddamn way back to his house, and then he said it lagged to the back of the group and looked him dead in the eyes before walking into the woods. So that was Anansi's Goatman story. It is still one of the creepiest ones I think I've read, mainly because the way, like, how sometimes the narrator even doesn't realize that the count of the people is off. It's just so good and it's done so well. It's so creepy. So the next one, let's see. So this next story is also a classic and one of my favorites of all time. It's really short but really effective, and it's called Candle Cove. And the way it's posted is like, it's posted on like an online forum, and this person called SkyShale033 creates this post with the subject Candle Cove Local Kids Show ? And they post, "Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m. This person by the username Mike Painter 65 responds, "It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and I was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl." Skyshield responds, "Yes, okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though." Another person, Jaren 2005, responds, "Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshell. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I can remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily, and there was Calliope music constantly playing. I don't remember the girl's name. Janice or Jade or something? I think it was Janice." Skyshield responds, "Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock in channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and a laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden or plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked." Mike Painter responds, "Haha, I remember now too. Do you remember this part, Skyshield? You have to go inside." Skyshell responds, "Ugh, Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. It just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above a really tall, narrow teeth." Someone with the username Kevin Hart responds, "I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when the show was on. Nightmare fuel." Jaren 2005 responds, "That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he only had one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then." Kevin Hart responds, "Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of kids show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape, and his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty." Skyshell responds, "Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin?" Mike Painter responds, "Yeah, I think so. Remember his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth? I remember the little girl said, 'Why does your mouth move like that?' And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, 'To grind your skin.'" Skyshield responds, "I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had, where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically, and just all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it." Kevin Hart responds, "I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that was an episode." Skyshield responds, No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show. Kevin Hart responds to that. Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God, I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. This is the intro that played at the beginning of most episodes. Jaren responds, oh God, yes, that little girl Janice. I remember seeing her shake, and the skin taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and that was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Sometime later, Mike Painter responds again. I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s when I was 8 or 9 and if she remembered a kids show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, because I used to think it was so strange that you said, I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now, Mom, and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had such a big imagination with your little pirate show. Okay, that is the creepiest one that I have ever read still. It's one of the creepiest ones, and it's so well done. And I love that that's just where it ends. I love that, there's no, like, outright monster or nothing. It's just, sometimes the unsettling ones are, like, the ones that really stick with you. This next one is, less old than the other ones that I've done. I think all those ones, I think, are over a decade older, but this one is more recent. I think this is 4 years old, and this one was posted on r/nosleep, and it's called Something Walks Whistling Past My House Every Night at 3:03 a.m. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or in the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good-sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was always a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only the two strange things here, the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it so much and to always remember the one rule, the big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I crept my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often, at least I haven't caught her much, but once or twice a month I think she sits out there on her big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides the night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is just really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this part much either, but good things just seem to happen to people around here a lot. Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard, the authentic kind. The weather is pretty good, and there's no crime, and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings I've heard my mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember, small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew, even I knew, Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found out that for every little miracle that happens here every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. They are very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, and I was sent to my room, where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was, really exceptionally hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us as long as we didn't look for what was making the noise. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad. But the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again. No presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some prank they played on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were being racist on account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and that they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kind of stories from his mom and that he knew there were some strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, Dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m. only to find my dad awake on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat, and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. It came and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she's grown into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved in directly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at age 105. She lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila folder, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. "Do you know who's always out there whistling every night?" Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. "We don't talk about that," I said. "I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house on the corner," Holden said. "Mr. Tolles?" my sister asked. "No way, he's really nice." Holden shrugged. "Must be a psycho killer, then." Nola tensed. "We don't talk about it," I repeated. "Let's go in my room and play Nintendo." We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see that Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. "Have you ever even tried looking?" he asked. "It's nearly time." Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. "We don't. See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't." "You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next. Because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into the room, and may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the keys to the blind." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand." "Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer, unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola," I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard it click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face, but I found myself moving. I'm not fast, I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola and turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips. Colder than it should have been for that time of the year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blinds shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Light sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lip so hard there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and looked back. He looked! I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night, in that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler, but that night we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." This time, the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and kneeled down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think—" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap tap tap. "Police," something said from the outside of the door. The voice from the outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police. Call the police. Police. My mom pulled us closer. Police. 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 Please stop, I heard her whisper. I don't think calling them will help, my dad said. How will we know when they're the ones at the door? The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook. Then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back, back to front, loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once, big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. Stop, Holden yelled. The knocking died. I won't tell, Holden said, staring at the door. I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away. We waited for nearly a minute. Then we heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back so loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We waited another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. Okay, he told us. It's done. Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but they wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room, Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Thursday there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me the most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell that something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my family when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe or share the burden if they did. I watch Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower if she'd looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too? To comfort her? To share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave. But we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore. And my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. That was the last story for today. I'm not used to talking for this long, but I hope that was really spooky for you. Or maybe relaxing. I don't know. I don't know if this counts as relaxing, if it's spooky stuff, but I hope you have a good day or a good night or a really fun Halloween. And remember, if you hear someone whistling walking past your house at night, don't look for who it is. Happy Halloween.